episode 28. Welcome to another episode of the Stories of Gumption podcast, conversations with entrepreneurs, creative thinkers, and just really, really impressive people. This episode is brought to you by Spar-Kil-Kleen. They are a professional cleaning service in the Champlain Valley. They provide professional and economic cleaning solutions to residential and commercial structures. They specialize in window cleaning, floor care, carpet extraction, auto and boat detailing. Give them a call at 518-578-2931. They'll hook you up with a free estimate. Like I said, residential and commercial accounts. They do both. Their team is growing. That's Zach and Kate Hoyt of Spar-Kil-Kleen. SPAR-KIL-KLEEN. Find them also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Take away the dashes or the hyphens, and that's how their social media is set up. That's it. 518-578-2931. You are one call away from just overhauling the cleanliness of your space. Trust me. We're also brought to you by Alexander Edwards & Company. Ladies and gentlemen, it's tax season, okay? Here we are in early March of 2020 as we're recording this, and if you haven't gotten your taxes together, now's the time. Now's the time. Alexander Edwards & Company, CPAs, PC. They have been providing common sense solutions to many North Country businesses, their real-life accounting and tax problems since 1920. That's right. This isn't their first rodeo. They've been in business since 1920. They're a full-service public accounting firm engaged in tax prep, bookkeeping, audits, estate planning, financial planning, and management consultation. Give them a call. They're at 518-563-1600. That's 518-563-1600. They're also located at 47 Dock Street in Plattsburgh. Get your taxes set. Today's episode, man, what a great conversation. I'm talking with Danielle Howard-Ross, and we talk all things motivation. We talk about the art of negotiation, which I think is a critical life skill, but particularly valuable if you're in a career of sales. And then, of course, wouldn't it be a Story of Gumption episode without some conversation about marathon training and her accomplishing the New York City Marathon on 6 weeks' notice. Pretty freaking awesome. Enjoy this episode of the Stories of Gumption podcast. Gumption, defined as initiative, aggressiveness, resourcefulness, courage, spunk, guts, common sense, and shrewdness. Welcome to the podcast. This is Stories of Gumption with your host, Ryan Lee. Today's guest, everybody, is Danielle Howard-Ross. She is the manager of marketing and sales at Platco, volunteer for the United Way, also a volunteer for North Country Veterans Association. Really proud to have you here.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, welcome to the podcast. I feel like we've crossed paths through LinkedIn for several years, but never had the chance to meet until just recently.
Until we were at the event at Peru School.
Oh yeah, what was that? Was the
College for Every Student, but it's not College for Every Student now. It's CFES Pathways, but
yes, Brilliant Pathways.
Brilliant Pathways, yes.
That was kind of cool.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
It was funny to see the similarities between everybody who was on the panel, vastly different in their jobs, but all had the same kind of story about how things kind of laid out for them and their different plans. And it was funny that there was 3 people that sold shoes before and different things.
And it didn't look like half the students were ready for that conversation. A lot of them were middle school students.
Yeah.
But
and I think it would have been a little better if they had chances to ask more questions. I think we kind of overtalked it. I mean, I know that was a task that we were supposed to do, but if they'd gotten a chance to really ask some questions, I think it could have opened up some doors for them a little bit more.
I concur. But anyhow, this is the Stories of Gumption podcast. So I want to kick it off by asking you what you think gumption means to you.
I think gumption to me is having the confidence to do something when you know you don't necessarily have control over the outcome and you might not get the results you want. So you go ahead and you move forward with something, either knowing you don't have the plan completely in place or knowing that there's some sort of risk involved. It's not a sure bet that either you're going to persevere through hard work, by luck, or, you're just going to problem solve and figure out a solution and how to get where you want to go.
So we've talked about a lot of different stories of gumption, potentially, before we hit the record button today. But one thing that really fascinates me is marathons. And you have a story.
I do have
related
a story.
It's an interesting take on a marathon experience. Go ahead. Let's hear it.
So the first time I ran a marathon was in 2012. I ran one in Montreal. It was a little less intimidating because it was close to home. I had just had my daughter turned a year and decided I was going to get back in shape, and I was going to do it for my 32nd birthday. So I was super excited about it and spent the summer training. My training plan wasn't what most athletes would say. It was more like, I'm not going to drink booze a week before and I'm going to just run a lot. But it wasn't, I didn't do any research. I just didn't have time to do it to see like the best way to run or how you should do it. I just went out and ran a lot. And
were you a runner before that? Or did you just wake up one day and say, I want to run a marathon?
So I would say I run, but I would not say I'm a runner. I've never had fast times. I just do it for kind of clearing my head and just, it's kind of like a social hour for my friends and I. I've got a group of girls that we run together. We talk about a lot of things. Actually, mostly I talk. They pretend they're listening, and we just keep going, and it passes the time. But it's just it's nice to get fresh air, and they're pretty good diehards about it. So we'll run early in the morning when it's dark, and I
can't do that. I try, but I'm a late evening runner. If I run, I struggle to wake up early to run or to exercise.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm definitely an early person, getting it done, and we just do it. So the first marathon wasn't as bad as I thought. When I finished it, I said, I'll never do it again because it wasn't that the race itself was terrible. I'll tell you, when I finished running, that feeling was like you have that high for like a minute, and then it was like, oh my God, your whole body is like crippled, and I could barely walk. And we were in Montreal, so we went to a couple pubs, had something to eat and drink, and every time we'd get up from those bar stools, like I could move less and less and less until we finally headed back to Plattsburgh. And then the next 2 days I was in so much pain, I was like, I'm never running again. I mean, my feet were black and blue, I had blisters, and it just wasn't fun. So I took some time off, and after my second child, I'd thought about running, and I did a lot of smaller races, so like the Boilermaker in Utica, some half marathons, and I still thought I would never run a marathon again. A girlfriend of mine tried to get me to run the New York City Marathon. She was like, put your name in. And I was like, nope, not interested. That ship sailed. I'm getting too old now. I'm not interested. And she put her name in. She won in the lottery. And then she sprained her ankle. We were doing actually a Spartan race. And she realized that she couldn't do that race that year. So she deferred for a year. Thought she'd have a year to train her ankle to get back in shape. And it didn't happen. So about 6 weeks before the New York City Marathon last year, she said, there's no way I can run this race. But I hate to get it like lost. Like it took a lot. It's deferred. I can't defer again. Would you want to run it for me? And I thought about it. I'd asked a couple friends, and they all said, you're crazy. I mean, at that time I hadn't run. I'd run a half marathon in April. So that was, 13 miles. And this is now September 15th-ish or so, about 6 weeks before the race. And I hadn't run more than 3 miles since
Oh my God. And you had 6 weeks to go.
And I had 6 weeks to go. So I really thought about it and contemplated. 6 weeks to go, 2 kids, a full-time job, and a husband who works shift work. So I kind of batted around the idea, but my girlfriends were really on board and like, well, we won't run it with you, but like we'll run with you to help you train. The weather was still nice. And they're like, we'll go and watch, like, because we knew another friend who was running the race, and she ultimately was running it solo because her boyfriend had dropped out because he was injured. So I said, what do I have to lose? I paid nothing for it. Like, I'm going to go. I'm going to try it out. So 6 weeks before the race, I started running. Still before marathon day, I had not run more than 12 miles was my longest run.
Oh, my God.
That I had done. And I figured I was just going to, like I said, I didn't know what the results were going to be. I knew I could figure out a way. I knew worst case scenario, if I could run the first 13, even if I walked the second 13 or a combination of run, walk, that I would be able to do it. And I just said the heck with it. I went. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I got it done.
Wow. It must have been all mental.
It was.
And I feel like a marathon, sorry to interrupt you, but like I feel like a marathon is truly like one of the ultimate mental toughness tests.
I think it is. And I think like it makes a big difference if you have somebody to run with. And the girl I ran with, and I will say in New York City compared to other races, like there's just so much going on and so much to see. So aside from just the crowd support, I mean, it's pretty cool when you're running like over the Brooklyn Bridge and when you're running and you can see like, you know, the Statue of Liberty off to the side and you see these skyscrapers and you see all sorts of really neat things. So it was pretty cool. I think some of it that was super intimidating to me was, and I can't think of exactly what, there was some sort of terroristic attack, and I'm trying to think which one it was, but it was like the week before the race. So at every intersection, they had taken garbage trucks and parked them sideways. There were cement barricades, so nobody could plow through the crowds. And it was really kind of freaky to see that, not so much while you're running the race, but the idea was planted in my head when we drove out to Staten Island in the morning to get there. And the streets were bare at that point, but you could see every intersection had some sort of barricade or some sort of garbage truck or cement trucks were parked. I mean, it was like they commandeered any truck that they could find to put in these intersections just so it would block people from getting. Oh, it was in one of the incidents where somebody was like just plowed through a crowd
in London.
People. Was that where it was? I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's been 2 years now, but
which is freaky because I think relatively around when that was still kind of being talked about, my wife and I went to London.
Okay.
And I remember at one point in time we walked across that spot, and then somebody around was like, "Yeah,
yes,
that's the spot."
It's exactly
and I was
what
like,
it was.
I was like, "Oh shit, this is real now.
Yeah,
this is real." Living in our North Country bubble here in Plattsburgh, it's like you know it's real, but like all of a sudden you're there and you're like, "Whoa, this is."
Yeah, and at 5 in the morning when you're driving, and New York City, which is generally never a sleepy, quiet town, but at 5 a.m. it's definitely much quieter and there's no traffic, and you just see all these intersections, and it really set into me like, oh, there's a chance. And you think about things like the Boston Marathon, and you think about other things, these terroristic attacks, and you're like, God, everybody who ran those races or everybody who was in those movie theaters or in those schools always thinks like it'll never happen to me. So I was kind of got in my headspace, and it was pretty distracting because there's not a lot going on. You're kind of quiet. You're kind of just kind of planning your routine, your strategy, that I was thinking about those things. And it was started to get a lot more intimidating at that point. Like, why did I sign up for this? Should I have done it? Should I not? And I think that's kind of where the gumption set in, because as I told you earlier, like the logistics of the New York City Marathon are just unbelievable. It was really a lot to take in. So, I mean, my start time was at 10:40. I met in Times Square at about 4:50 in the morning.
Holy shit.
Yeah, to get on a bus at 5:30 to go to Staten Island to get there. So the Staten Island Ferry, which is free, runs every 20 minutes. You can take that, but you don't reserve tickets. It's first come, first serve. The lines are really long, and it's really crazy to be able to get in there. Also, to make arrangements for these start times and traffic. I mean, they tell you should be there a minimum of 2 hours in advance. So I had joined something called Fred's Team, which is a fundraising team for Sloan Kettering. So it's for cancer research and cancer patients. It's really amazing. And I paid a donation and then fundraised a little bit more. So the nice part was they provided the busing there. And then they had like some heated tents, which were nice because the day of the race, it was raining. It was about 38 degrees that morning. So it was pretty chilly if you had to stand outside for 4 hours. Not that the tents were much warmer, but it did give some relief that there was, bathrooms there and snacks, and you had a little bit of a space. But it was overwhelming.
Geez. Okay. So you finally get there. What's the bib pickup? I assume that's a nightmare too.
Yep.
If getting just to the starting line is that much of a nightmare, what's it like even just getting your bib?
So the Javits Center is where you do the pickup, and we went to the city. So the race was on Sunday. We got there late Thursday evening, and Friday did it. It was about a 2-hour production to get from where we were staying to where the convention center was. You have to show your ID. It was like 3 times I had to show my ID to be able to go through. They print out all sorts of electronic things. And when I say I showed my ID, it was actually my girlfriend's ID because I was running as her. Luckily, they're not too strict about it. But I think that was the first time I'd used a fake ID since I was an adult and not 38 years old, using somebody else's ID to pick up a race bib,
right.
Which was funny in and of itself. but you were corralled like cattle through line after line to go to different areas that it was like you got fitted for your shirt. Cause you did get a really nice race shirt. It wasn't, I will say that for what you paid, you did get something nice. But that area was one spot and you had to try on the shirts first because they wouldn't take them back. And then you had to go wait in another line, whether you needed a small, medium or large, there was different lines. And while they tried to do it as efficiently as possible, it just took a lot of time. And then you had to go and you had to sign like another waiver before you went. And then you had to pick up, your bib and get everything else. And then now you've done this all and you've got to kind of backtrack through everything and get out. And of course they corral you through where all the vendors are trying to sell, socks and sneakers and all sorts of things, which is really nice. And I understand it has to be there, but it took about 2 hours to get through that whole process and then get a taxi back to the hotel.
Ugh. What was the best or most memorable part of that race track? I'd assume there's a lot of cool spots.
There was a ton of cool spots. What I really liked actually was running through Central Park. And I think because that's where you end. So it's kind of like you're coming up on the finish. It's beautiful. I guess I've spent a lot of time in the city. I used to live outside of the city. So we'd go in and we'd do some sightseeing and of course partying and eating out and whatnot. But you never see big parks. You always, like, my idea of New York City is parks are really small. They're kind of built sometimes on rooftops or like in underutilized spaces between buildings. But Central Park is huge. I mean, it's, city blocks. I mean, it's miles what Central Park is. And I just wasn't expecting it to be that big. I had no idea it was that big. And it was just, I think because of the fact it was like kind of this sleepy little quiet thing. But it was the end of the race. So the crowd excitement as you got there, it's your last like 2.5 miles of the race, was just over the top because they just knew you were finishing and you were kind of at that low where you're like, oh my God, I can't do this. Like, it's only 2 more miles. I've done 24, but the last 2, when I started putting it in my head, I'm like, God, that's going to take me like over 20 minutes. Like, that's a long time to be running. When you've already run, at that point it was 4 hours and 15 minutes at that point that I've been running. So it was
that's such a long time.
It's a long time. It's a really long time. But
did you feel your legs at that point? Like, it's just numb, or is it pain, or is it both?
They were like it was almost like your out of body experience. Like, you feel like you're going so slow. Like, I felt like I was going, and I kept checking my watch because I was like, I felt like I was running like 15-minute miles. Like, it was slow. And then I looked down and it was like 9:50 or 10:10. I'm like, I'm not really going that slow, but it felt like you were. It kind of felt like you were like in this alter universe for me anyway. I'm sure people who actually trained probably didn't have that experience, but I was like, could not wait to finish. And that's where I really, my best 2 miles were the last 2 miles. And I think it was really just because you knew you were coming to an end. The crowd support was amazing. And it was just, like I said, this energy about it that was like really like, I don't know, a city of strangers. And I mean, other than my girlfriends that went down and my friend's boyfriend, there's a handful, half a dozen people that I know cheering me on. I don't know anybody else in the city. It's not like when you run the Plattsburgh Half Marathon, every other block you see somebody and people know you by name. But there, suddenly everybody's just yelling for you. So it was nice.
You mentioned that people would put like their name on their shirt.
With Sharpie, people would write their names across either their arms or down the sleeve of their shirt or across like, their breast, like pretty large, like some things you could see. And that's kind of what they do. People just start yelling. If they see a name written, they'd start yelling, Ryan, way to go. Or, Danielle, way to go. Keep it up. And, it kind of takes you off guard at first because like, oh, it must be another person. There's not another Danielle. And then you realize, oh, I wrote my name. That's why. So it was one of those tricks that they actually told us when you did packet pickup. Like, that's a thing that people do. So
that must have been so hard to prep as well as you could have over 6 weeks.
It was.
I feel like that's like a lot of people like train for like a year or 6 months or 4 months.
I had spent most of that summer before eating a lot of carbs, sitting by my pool, drinking a lot of Tito's.
I was carb loading for a solid 5 years.
I didn't know what I was carb loading for. It turns out it was the marathon, but it seemed to work out.
And so you ran the Montreal.
The Montreal Marathon.
What's the time difference here between the two?
2012 and 2018. So
you
6 years
literally
in
just
between.
did this. Mm-hmm. Wow, 2 years ago.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, just over a year. It was November of 2018.
Yeah. That's wild.
So I think in my mind, like, that kind of is like the classic definition of gumption. Like, I had no plan. I knew that like the laws of, not physics per se, but, anybody who was training for a race has a plan, a better plan. They know you need so much time, you need so much effort, you need so much this, you need so much that, nutrition, you should be at your optimal weight, you should have this. And it was like, I didn't even get new running shoes, and I just ran with what I had. And it was because of the point, like once I got to the point where I had about 2 weeks before the race, I was like, oh, I should have got new shoes. But then I was like, why would I switch it up now? Because I've got 2 weeks, I'll get blisters. Like if I get blisters, I won't run. So it was a strange dynamic, but I muckled through and figured I'm just going to do it. And, my first kind of goal was like, all right, I want to just finish it. I want to finish it and like be proud of the time I finished. And then I said to myself, like, that's bullshit. Like, just to say you're going to finish, like, that's a loosey-goosey goal. You're like writing yourself off. Like, let's set some more goals. So like I had a couple like kind of micro goals. Like I'm not going to walk for at least the first 9 miles. So like that was like my first chunk. Like, okay, I'm not going to walk at all. If I can make it through 9 miles, I knew I could get through that. It wasn't going to, time-wise in my head, I'm like, all right, it's about an hour and a half. I can do anything for an hour and a half. And that's kind of like how I chunked things out. And then, the time that ultimately I was looking to beat was my first one I did in 4:24. I knew it was not possible I could ever beat that time because I was now older, a second kid later, and had trained for only 6 weeks. So, I was shooting for that. I wanted to finish under 4:45, and I did. I finished right under 4:40. So for me, it was really fantastic. Like it was what I wanted, and it wasn't a sandbagging goal. So
you had to eat the gels and stuff along the way or any of that? Or did you just no fuel? You just like powered through, all mental?
I had a few.
David Goggins style.
No, I definitely had a few. Like a friend of mine had told me about using some of the goo packets actually have caffeine in them. The ones I'd had before weren't. They were just sugar and like some sort of caloric intake, so like some sort of calories. I tried every 3 miles to have those. The problem is like when you start to get dehydrated, it's so hard to get that goo down if you're not like chugging it with water. And my whole thing was it was really hard to drink water at that point. Like I just didn't want to stop and like have to like chug it down. So I was just kind of like, I don't know, moving around my mouth, trying to swallow it. Like it was like Laffy Taffy. It was awful. But it worked. The downside was when you have those every 3 miles and you're doing 26 miles, you have about 9 packets of those. You look at the caffeine intake. They have 80 milligrams of caffeine, which is about same as a cup of coffee. So it was like I had 9 cups of coffee.
Oh my gosh.
So I didn't sleep well afterwards. That's for sure.
And that's what you needed.
Right.
Oh my gosh. I referenced David Goggins. You familiar with David Goggins is?
I'm not.
Oh, this is good. Okay, so he's pretty extreme. Okay. But it reminds me a little bit of what you just did because it sounds like it's pretty much all mental what you did. I mean, obviously physical fitness is a big piece too, but like 6 weeks of training for a full marathon, you must have powered through mentally. I can't.
I did.
Yeah. So this guy, David Goggins, he is a little crazy, but I'll try and give you the short story here, but he just wrote a book called Can't Hurt Me.
Okay.
So if you want to make a mental note for the future, but
okay.
he basically grows up in I think it's Rochester, New York area. He's overweight. He lives in an abusive household, very rough childhood, and ultimately wants to be in the Air Force as a paratrooper. He goes in, and because he's out of weight or overweight, out of shape, he fails out, can't get in, and then he becomes an exterminator.
Very similar career path.
I'm realizing this isn't the same exact thing, but my point here is his mental toughness. So I'm getting to it. But he ultimately decides down the road he wants to be a Navy SEAL, and I don't know where this came from, but he has to pass the whatever the test is that you have to take to get into the military.
Okay.
And he has to pass all the physical fitness things. He goes through the worst week, they call it Hell Week, 3 times because he fails the Navy SEAL test 2 times in a row. And he keeps going back for more pain and more like, the Navy SEAL training. It's like one of the worst things ever. And then he eventually becomes a Navy SEAL. Then he goes on to be a ranger or something, which is even more difficult. And then he goes on to do, he breaks these records and gets winning times for 50-milers and 100-milers.
Those
and
ultra marathons.
Yeah, like, who is this guy, right? And then he now also holds the world record for number of pull-ups in 24 hours. It's like 4,000, some crazy number. And so one. Throughout the book, he comes back to this theme all the time of like the classic saying, embrace the suck.
Yeah.
And like how your body always has more in the tank than your mind is telling you. And I just can't. I just think about that a lot now whenever I'm running, because you must have had to go through that.
I just had to keep
mental.
It, like your reward will be like, and I was just doing all these calculations in my head. Like, okay, if I can run a mile and then I walk a minute, and I was already 10 miles into it, I'm like, the most I can change my time is 14 minutes. So then I was like, okay, this will work. So then I was like, I'd run that mile and then I'd try to walk that. And then I was realizing that it was so dumb. Like, you think it's adding a full minute, but it's not, because that time you still would have been running at a slower pace. So it was really only adding like 30 seconds. So then it somehow seemed like, when you only have to think about running 10 minutes and you get to walk a minute, it was like that minute I wasn't even walking a minute. It was like a few seconds to catch my breath. I'm like, all right, I can do this again. And it was just chunking those little goals. Like, that's how I had to keep playing mind tricks on myself. Like, if you do this, then you get this. And I'm really all about like if then goals. Like, if this happens, this is what we're doing. If I get this, like, we'll do this next. So.
Oh man. Now I'm all conflicted because I have put my name into the lottery. Never run a marathon before in my life. This is like a little underlying theme of a lot of my podcasts. I feel like I freak out about marathons because I secretly want to do one, but
you should definitely do it. And if you get it, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity.
It's like I suck at getting up early in the morning. Obviously, I would do it if I got in, but it's like, okay, if I pull what are all the times? You said you start at 10 something, but there's times throughout the whole morning, right?
So I think there's the chair races, which is pretty amazing. So the people who are doing it like in a wheelchair, which those athletes I have tremendous respect for. I've never seen people persevere. And when you're on these inclines and these people
I can't
are
even
like
imagine
giving it everything they got, and you can see like their arms trembling, and they're like, 7 miles in, and you just know like this is really hard for them, and it's awesome. But they start earlier to try to get the people who are really good. Obviously you have a gamut of people. So you have the great athletes, the elite athletes that are in the wheelchairs, and then you have the people who are, I'm just going to, more like me, I'm just going to figure out how to do it. So they want to start them first so they can get everybody off. Those people have a chance because it's so hard to like navigate in a wheelchair or a handstand around people. So I think they start around 7:30 in the morning, maybe 7:30.
Okay.
And I think the last race time start at like 1:15, 1:30, like.
Holy
There's a lot of waves. It's every 20 minutes. And it's pretty legit. Like, you cannot sneak into a wave. Like, you cannot try to move up to an earlier time. Like, it's very hard. There's a lot of security. And I understand why they do it, but they're checking bibs and they're turning people away. And, they want to make sure that, they've got enough people on the course and not too many people. So it's, I can't imagine being on the logistics team for the New York City Marathon.
My God, that's crazy. But there's thousands and thousands of people watching.
Yeah, if you figure there's 50,000 people that run it, if each of those people only had 2 visitors that came with them, 2 supporters, and then you figure all the people who live in New York City, it's a big party weekend for them. Like, they know they're locked in their streets, that they're not going anywhere, that the restaurants are going to suck because they're packed with all these tourists. So, like, you go by and you see, like, all these people on balconies and rooftops just drinking mimosas and shouting and cheering and, like, having a great time because they're kind of held hostage in their own city until, the race is over. That's
wild. Well, we'll see. I guess we'll have to give an update if I get in. Or
I hope that you do.
Yeah,
it's fun.
We'll give it a shot.
I'm sure your training plan will be better than mine.
Yeah, I've been running fairly regularly, but not on a training plan for that in particular. I've also contemplated the Burlington. Mm-hmm. Have you ever done the Burlington? I've done the half. You've done the half.
Yep, not the full.
I hear the.
There's some hills. Some hills.
They call it the assault on Battery Street.
Battery Street, that's the worst.
Oh, you're working for Hickok and Boardman, where it's right down there.
Okay.
Right in Burlington. I spent a lot of time last several years in Burlington, and Battery Street that's the mother of all hills over there.
Yeah.
And apparently you got to go up the whole thing at like mile 15.
I know, right at the end. So I was running the second half. I split the race with somebody, and it was tough to finish it the second half.
So you had to do the Battery Street?
Battery Street. But luckily at that point I was only like maybe 6 miles in. Okay. I can't imagine if I had been, 17 miles in at the time. It would have been way worse.
I'm really selling it to myself.
You'll do it. Like I said, I didn't take it too
It's all
seriously.
mental, though. I go back to David Goggins. He's a little extreme because because of some of the examples he says, but like, I think the mindset makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you set your mind to, even though your whole body feels like it's going to fall apart.
Yeah, it's not. Just keep thinking about you only have to do it for so much longer.
Exactly. Well, that's impressive.
Thanks.
I'll have to check in with you as my progress keeps going, I suppose.
You should probably get a real athlete to check in with. I'm not sure that I'll give you any good advice because.
Yeah, but I feel like I relate to you more. Like I'm the one that wants to like carb load for 5 years and then like.
Like I said, 3 days before the race, so that Thursday night, we took the train in the city. We arrived at like 1:00 in the morning. It was the last city train. Went out and had a few drinks and checked into the room at about 3:30 in the morning, and that's when they double booked the room. So I sat on a lady's foot who she sat up and punched me in the face because if you can imagine, 5 girls, 4 of which were pretty intoxicated, coming into a room at that hour of the morning, probably scared her to death. And we quickly exited the room, went down to the front desk, and immediately the lady's phone was ringing, and she could tell it was a very angry lady who was, screaming about it. So again, I don't think my training advice, I don't think anybody would tell you 2 days before the race, go out until 3:30 in the morning and have drinks and, pizza from the street corners. Everything about it was wrong, but it worked out.
It seems like this is a perfect transition towards like the other layer of conversation I wanted to have with you, but we're both in sales roles.
Yep.
And I feel like the one thing I love to talk about with fellow salespeople with is sort of this concept that like life is one big negotiation, and like sales is in so much more of everybody's life than they want to admit. But I feel like there's this stigma of no. It's defensive. I'm not a salesperson, but actually being a salesperson is an incredibly impressive thing if you're successful.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to be in sales. Some days.
Some days
it's not, but most days it is.
So your sales is probably different from mine, but mine is very a long sales cycle. There's only one opportunity per year per potential client when they renew to meet them, but like how does yours work? How does your world work?
So before I came to Platco doing industrial sales, I was selling for Pepsi. I was a district manager for Pepsi. So we're talking things that are $10 a case and something that everybody knows. And in this area, there's a super loyal following to Pepsi. It was a heavy market share, so 70 market share. So 70% of the business automatically went to Pepsi. People want their Mountain Dew around here. So things were pretty easy to sell. It was... it wasn't a life or death situation asking you to buy Pepsi or get a display in your store. It was low risk for them. I mean, it sold itself. And not that I'm diminishing the value of any Pepsi salesman or, any product like that, but it was much different. So then I joined the Platco team and I went to selling valves that, our average valve is about $10,000. Sales cycle is usually 90 to maybe 180 days. Some projects, the least expensive valve we sell is about $3,500, the most expensive. I mean, we sold some that are, one valve is over $100,000. So that was hard enough of a challenge going to that mindset. And then the second piece that was really challenging was, whether you're dealing with a client now, I mean, ultimately, some of your business, is any of it commercial or is it all?
My focus is almost 100% commercial.
Okay. So you get it that you have the same challenge, I assume, that you can convince somebody all you want, but it's ultimately not their money to spend.
Right.
There's still another layer of approval process. So you've got the relationship with John. You love John. John loves you. He knows you're going to give great customer service. But John's now got to go sell to Jane. And Jane's not convinced because she doesn't know you. She's busy. She doesn't deal with that. So there's this whole other layer of trying to convince convince the end user, in the account, like, yeah, I'm going to be your person. I'm going to be your guy or gal. We have a good rapport. Things are going well. I've got the solution for you. And you get their buy-in. And then when you're dealing with these corporations, then it's like they have to now convince either their boss or the plant manager or whatnot. And then a lot of times, in your world, somebody has to have insurance. People don't have to.
Not everybody needs to have a valve.
They don't. And a lot of times they fully recognize that they need it. but it's just not in the budget. So they choose to do nothing. And that's probably the most frustrating part of my job, is when you've convinced everybody, they recognize that you're the solution, everything is going well, but then they say, we can't get the funding. So they're dealing with a broken competitive piece of equipment, or they kind of, rig it to work and just kind of, jimmy things around, and it works good enough that it'll get them through. And, my argument always is like, but what happens when it really fails and it stops working? Like, you're going to have to do something then. And a lot of times when these plants have a failure like that, what it means is it's not like if you came in today and your computer was just completely dead, like there's nothing that you can do. There's other things you do, whether it's filing, or you could call customers, or you could ask somebody else to do something. In a lot of plants, it's, I sat in a plant waiting room one day when I was supposed to do a training for almost 6 hours, because they were telling me it was costing them $18,000 an hour to be down, and they had down equipment. So he's saying, I cannot pull my people off from their jobs to come and sit here and do a training with you and Bob today. Like, you're going to have to wait. And we were in a remote area of California. So it was, you start doing that math, and you're like, wow, $18,000 an hour, and it's 6 hours, it just cost this plant this much money. We had another very large client in New York. It's, I've got some NDAs, so we can't talk about it too much.
Sure.
But very, very prestigious company who traded for us. We spec'd out a product, and they said, okay, we gave them a very competitive price. It was for a pilot plant. And they said, you're just too expensive. You're too expensive. We can't buy it. We're going to get something from overseas. So the product that they got was about 25% less than what we had offered them. But they still split the business. So they gave us some of the business, but then they split the other business and gave it to this offshore import. And that piece of equipment didn't even perform for 6 hours in the plant. And when it didn't perform for 6 hours, it shut down their entire process.
Yes.
They couldn't get anybody to call them back. They couldn't get replacement parts from overseas. They called and they called and they called. And I mean, this is a very huge corporation. This is not like just a mom and pop place calling to complain. I mean, they've got a lot of weight to throw around, and they really got nowhere. So then they came back to us and said, okay, we really need your help. So they started coming, working with our engineering team. And at that point, we had to say, okay, now not only are we more expensive than what we were before, but now there's an expedite fee. Like, you're asking us to do things like more work, more design time. We've got to rush it. We'll get it to you, but it's going to cost us much more. And the value proposition was such that, like, okay, but our entire process is shut down. So we have no other options right now. So literally they traded, about $150,000 extra in cost because it shut down their process.
Yeah.
When upfront it was about a $15,000 spend difference.
Yeah. That's wild. Like, I feel like there's so many parallels in longer sales cycle type B2B situations, but I can think of so many times where the value proposition is just not getting through in the way that I had hoped. Sometimes it goes through perfectly, but there's always that, as you know, the weight of like value versus cost versus
the risk involved too.
The word risk is, I almost thought about making this podcast Stories of Risk, because I feel like there's so many themes within this concept of just risk, and people have such different risk tolerances.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. And it comes out clear in their buying decisions. But
yes.
But that's really interesting to me. So do you find you have a lot of competition, or? So
we don't necessarily have, I guess the best way to explain it is, you've got a cup of coffee right now and I have a bottle of water. Mm-hmm. If you're thirsty, you know that either one of those, you might not like them, but they're both going to meet your needs. In my case, we're selling dissimilar products. So it'd be like if I compared this phone to this bottle of water. They do the same thing, but you don't know that my phone is going to quench your thirst because it's a product that's so unfamiliar to you. So every time you're looking for something to quench your thirst, you're going to look for something in liquid state, something that looks like what you're used to, where my product is a whole different technology. So it's trying to get them to recognize, okay, these are the same, this will accomplish the same thing, but it's a better solution, and here's why. And that's where it's a little bit challenging when it's, soft drinks, or if it's something, if it's insurance, well, your portfolio might be different, or your value adds might be different, or, your customer service might be different. People get that insurance is insurance. So they're going to call an insurance company. Well, our biggest thing that we compete against is something called a rotary airlock, and that would spin, if you can imagine, like a water wheel, like it spins, where our valves are more like a spaceship concept, as I tell people, that like you go in an airtight chamber, and to go into the next chamber, the first door has to be closed. You're in this airtight chamber. You'd open a door, you'd go out, and you'd have to shut that door. So you always have that airtight seal. That's what our product does, but it looks nothing like what they're used to. So it's hard to get them, it's kind of a two-step process when you're trying to convert that first they have to recognize that this will accomplish, the goal and give them an optimal solution. And then second, now you have to start the whole, okay, now you have to buy from me, as opposed to switching suppliers and just, it's hard when you go to something that's unknown. If I tried to convince you tomorrow to buy a power scooter because it'll still get you to work, you're like, but I'm used to a car.
Yeah.
Or, even just looking at like a car truck situation that, people generally in their buying habits are the same. There's a reason why, you're comfortable with the truck, even though a car might give you a better solution. Or, in my case, for a long time, people tried to convince me to drive a minivan. I wasn't doing it. Like, it probably was a better solution. It was more economical. It had more room. It had, many more, things that would be advantageous to my family, but it just wasn't resonating with me, that I was like, nope, not doing it. I'm not switching. I can't do it. And that's kind of how I liken it to my customers sometimes, is that it's hard. People don't like change, and people are used to doing things that they've always done. And now it's kind of like, it'll be a better solution, but that upfront cost, whether it's indirect of its labor, its time, its training, it's figuring out what to do, it's switching suppliers, and sometimes it's even as small as just the paperwork to get something switched, that people are just put off by it. Like, I don't want to fill out credit terms. I don't want to try to find a new supplier. My purchasing manager is just going to give me a hard time about this. I don't like to deal with her. Like, I'm not going to her, and that's where it's hard.
How do you in your business typically open up doors? Like, it's a brand new prospect, or is Placo pretty well known, or is there a lot of situations where you're reaching out to a prospect that's never heard of Placo, and like, how does that work in your industry?
So in our industry, we're very well known in a couple key industries. So energy from waste, which is very intriguing to me. It's our trash incineration plants. So up until I started with Placo, I never thought about when I put my Casella bin out or a garbage bin, like, where's this actually going? Now I've been to over 100 of these plants across Canada and the United States. I've toured them, I've looked at them. And when you see a 2-ton claw picking up trash and it's running 24/7, you think about, wow, that's 4,000 pounds of trash is getting picked up every time that claw moves. And it goes
wild.
All day long. It's crazy. I can tell you the smell of a garbage incineration plant is, that water that goes in the bottom of your trash bin in the summertime? That's what these plants smell like all the time. So it's not a nice smell, but it's very intriguing. So anyway, within that industry, cement, iron ore, mining, and steel, we're very, very well known. We're a staple. We're the Kleenex of valves. They know Placo. We're very well respected. I think, honestly, a lot of our customers would be shocked to learn we're as small as we are, that we're 62 people in Plattsburgh, New York. And if they came to see our facilities, they'd be like, oh, like, we thought it must have been, much bigger and much more robust, because we're a really critical part of their process. But that said, there's still all these other industries that we can branch into. And I was just in Nashville 2 weeks ago for biomass, which is very similar to the garbage incineration plant. We do a lot like in power, but it's a different kind of power. So it's all of your biomass, your clippings, your wood, that type of thing. So we're an unknown to those people. So it's a lot of kind of starting to change your perception that, we know we're not coming back with a purchase order, but what are we going to measure success? We're going to come back with 50 new leads, and they're going to be qualified leads, and here's our plan to attack them, because we know that even if you're interested in the product, you might not have a need right now. Just because you like our product, if your valve isn't broken down, if it's not time to do an upgrade, you're not going to be interested. And that's okay. It's planting that seed, softening the beachhead now, getting in front of them, getting enough touch points so when they're ready to, when something happens and their valve breaks, now instead of just going and ordering the same thing, they're going to say, oh, I met that girl at that show. Let me dig out her card. Or I just got an email from Placo a month ago. I'm going to find it. And they'll just start remembering. And that's, our challenge is we're about 10 people who work for Placo in sales, covering the entire world. So it's a big world. There's a lot of things. So what we have to, we kind of joke about all the time is, we've got to get a focus that there's all these things we want to do and all these opportunities we know that are there. But if we try to do too little, we just don't do it well. We just kind of dip our toes in the water and it's kind of diluted. So we have to really put on full court presses. If we go after certain industries or certain businesses, or we design new products. We just launched a product that's specific to the cement industry. So that's really one of our key targets and initiatives. And that's what's, it's fun because we can really influence change a lot. Like it doesn't, being so small and getting these larger orders, you really feel good about it because it's what keeps the guys busy in the shop, and it keeps everything moving. And it's not like when I worked for Pepsi, you know, we signed SUNY Plattsburgh and it was great. And it was 100,000 cases and I should have been ecstatic. And I mean, it was going to be reflected in my pay. Like that's a big commission on these things. But at the end of the day, Indra Nooyi, the CEO of Pepsi, she didn't care. She didn't notice. 100,000 cases to all these shareholders is nothing. But in a $100,000 order to 62 employees, and, you know, if everybody on the sales team gets one, well, there's $1 million. That's a lot of money. So it's fun. It's fun to do that.
Yeah, that's cool. How'd you find yourself falling into a sales career like that? Because I feel like my anecdotal experience with most salespeople is they didn't graduate high school and go, yep, I'm going into sales.
I graduated from college, got a great job working for the Red Cross. It was a not-for-profit, but it was not-for-profit, which in my mind at the time was not for pay. So it was...
Been there. Trust me. I know what you're talking about.
A great starting point.
Service-oriented, learn a lot of experience.
I did learn a lot, met a lot of nice people. I actually installed the Lifeline buttons that people wore, and it was a great... just all around learning experience for me. But it wasn't enough. So I supplemented waitressing on the side, bartending on the side. And then, you know, you get to the point that you're a college grad and you're working 3 jobs and you're just always doing things and it didn't work. So I had applied for a position at SUNY Plattsburgh as an admissions advisor. So I had started working there. I really liked that. And I liked the idea of selling kind of this intangible, that I was selling them on the area, that I was selling them on the college, that I was selling them on things. And I enjoyed that. I did that for about a year, and then I decided I wanted to go back to school, so I went and got my MBA at SUNY New Paltz and started working there, doing same kind of thing, but for the business program. It was an assistant to the director of business, so it would be meeting with a lot of students, reviewing resumes, trying to help them decide whether they should be going back to school, if it's a full-time thing, a part-time thing, like what's going to work for you, that type of stuff. And it was really... where I started realizing, like, oh, people are listening to me, to be honest. It was like and I should say, actually, my first job in sales was all through high school and college. I'd worked at Sears.
Yes.
In a sales role there.
Classic retail experience.
As, like, sales. Like, it was a commission sales job, but I'll be completely honest. I'm going to diminish the value of my sales at that point. I was a young blonde girl selling tractors, and I worked with some really grumpy old men. So when somebody came in, just by saying hi and being nice and knowing a little bit about the product, it pretty much sold itself. So I really can't say that it was much of a sales job at that point. It was more just a means to pay my bills. And they actually had a great tuition reimbursement program at the time, so it helped offset some of my college. But when I went back to school, then I started my MBA classes. It was in marketing is where I went my concentration. Nice. And again, I was still waitressing. It's always been a theme of like waitressing and bartending because it's lucrative and it's easy. And it was always something that was available at nighttime. So if you're taking classes during the day. And I just realized that like I could upsell people all the time. Like I'd convince people at the restaurant I worked at to order high-end things, knowing that it was going to make the bill more expensive, which therefore would make my tip more expensive. And when you start to realize you've kind of got a knack of just talking to people and relating to them, and that you can use your it always sounds like a negative when you say like your influence to negotiate or add value. Yeah. And
because you can't discredit either that there was probably additional value or better experience from you upselling. I mean, they just needed
they needed the convincing.
The convincing.
Once you convince them to do it, it kind of, I don't want to say it becomes addicting, but it does sort of. Like it's fun because you realize like, oh, I got them to do it, and it's. I think like we talk about negotiation. In my mind, it has such a negative connotation that people think like a negotiation is so bad. Well, ultimately, it's kind of like you just said. Negotiation is always like, how can we make it mutually beneficial? And I think when you go into it with that mindset of, you know, I'm not the person, even in sales, I don't ever want to screw anybody over. I don't want somebody I had a conversation even with a customer recently that I was just like, I'm not interested. If you're not going to feel good about this transaction, I'd rather not do it. Like,
exactly.
It doesn't work for me. So how can we make it be a win-win? You have to save money. I have to make money. My company has to make money, and you guys need a product. So how can we triangulate this all to figure out something that's going to work that you're not going to feel like you were taken advantage of? Like, I can't change certain things. I can't change the price. Like, we have certain margins that we have to meet. We have certain costs that just happen because we're a U.S.-based manufacturer. But I'm not going to discount your feelings because you do own them, that, like, they're your feelings. If you feel you're getting screwed here, like what more could we do? And that's where some of these like the add-ons come in, like the value add of, okay, what if I threw in, we can send a tech for on-site commissioning, or what if a year after it's installed, we'll send somebody out there at no charge to you to help you do your first repair job. And, that kind of makes people feel a little bit better. And I think when everybody feels like they've gotten a win, it just works out better for everybody.
Yeah.
But you have to get them sometimes to recognize what that win is. Like they don't realize that there's still a win. So when it was working in a Mexican restaurant, maybe it was, you're not going to have a hangover tomorrow because you're drinking like the worst bar stock tequila. Like, have something a little smoother. Or, to be honest, like there's so much sugar in this. Why don't you try this tequila teeny? Like, I promise you'll feel better about it. And,
yes,
that kind of thing. Or you're not going to spend, you're going to spend $15 to get this giant margarita, but if you were going to have 3 of these anyway, like you're still getting 5 more ounces and you're paying $3 less,
yes.
Whatever the situation is, but making them recognize like, okay, yeah, I don't feel bad about it. There's something in it.
Yep. I feel like sales is this like constant balance between recognizing when the fit is right and when it's not.
Right.
I've had multiple situations where the first time we had a great conversation, it was very clear to me that this person was not in the right position to look at their insurance options. And that's fine. And I think the best best salespeople are the ones that can recognize that, see the long game of it, and walk away,
right.
And maybe come back or never come back, but recognize that it's not personal.
Right.
It's just, did that person want the big margarita
right.
or not? They didn't. It's not personal.
And
right?
I think that's the hardest part of sales.
People take it so personal, like, oh, God, I suck at my job. No, you don't. That person walked in, knew what they wanted, and they were not prepared to buy that. Just
right.
because you couldn't get them to buy that does not mean you're bad at sales. It just means you got to play the numbers better, right?
We do a lot of role playing at work, which people hate. Nobody likes to role play, where in my mind, it's a game. Like, I would actually rather ham it up and like nail a role play, because it's easier for me to do in an artificial situation, because you have some level of control that you don't have when you pick up the phone and somebody's calling you, or when you're in front of a customer and somebody else comes in the room or something happens. But I have a really hard time convincing sometimes the people on the sales team that just because somebody says something or they're not buying, we can't take it personal, and that there's a difference between a statement of fact. If I say to you, Ryan, I'm just not interested in the insurance, it doesn't mean you suck as a person. It doesn't mean that I don't need insurance. It doesn't mean, it's finding out what is that next step. Why are you not interested? Oh, your father sells insurance. Okay, totally get it. I'm never going to convince you. So let's talk about sports instead.
Yeah.
Where people take it so personally, and they can't remove the two. Or when somebody says something like, your price is too high, our people sometimes, used to feel so defeated, like, oh, our price is too high, it's a pricing issue. And not realizing that, no, it's just a statement of fact. Your price is high. You're right, it is high, but here's what you get when you get this price. You're not calling a call center in India. You're getting somebody who speaks the language. We can send technicians to your site, usually within a day or two, blah, 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 and trying to convince them. And so many times people think like when somebody says like the statement of fact that it's always a negative, instead of just what are the next questions or what are the next steps? How can we kind of overcome this? It's not necessarily an objection. It's just, we've now said something. Let's address this before we move on to the next thing.
Yes. Do you have any examples of, from a sales perspective, of moments in your life where negotiation just came in handy? Because you're clearly someone who has continued to improve and master the craft of negotiation, and I feel like that must have benefited you.
It's benefited me a lot of times. I've got a 4 and 8-year-old, so I'm constantly negotiating with them.
Yes.
Luckily, they're not old enough to realize what's happening now, and a lot of times I'll just set the stage, like especially with them. I'll give them the 3 options that I want, but I let them believe that they're making the decision. Where if I'd open it up and said, what do you want to do tonight? We might end up snow tubing in Titus Mountain, which I have zero desire to do. But if I'll say, okay, I'm going to let you girls decide today. Here are the 3 things you can do. Then they'll pick one. They feel so good about it because they think they made the decision. And I'm like, yeah, well, those are the 3 things I wanted to do tonight. Of course, I don't really care. But other things that are funny is like my friends will just say like, I am that person that's constantly wheeling and dealing, like trying to get something. We had been at a bachelorette party in Nashville for my girlfriend Brandy's wedding. And we were waiting for a taxi. Taxis were really hard to get. And this is before the Uber age. This is like 6 or 7 years ago. So we're a bunch of middle-aged moms having a great time. Like, we're just waiting to go downtown. And I see a limo driver parked in the parking lot of our hotel. So the girls are all trying to get cabs. They're trying to figure out what to do. And I just walk over and I negotiate with this guy. And I'm like, what are you waiting for? And he said, well, they were at it was a hockey game for these like over 50 men, like a hockey league. So he's like, I'm waiting for them. They get done. They have this limo for the whole weekend. So I'm like, well, what time are they done? He says, in an hour. The game will be done at 7. It's only 6 o'clock at night. So I'm like, you're just going to sit here for an hour? He's like, why not? I'm getting paid. I'm like, well, would you like to get paid $50 more? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, we want to ride. It's 3 miles down the road. And we'll pay you $50. You bring us down. My friends and I just want to get a picture in the limo. We won't drink any of their booze. We won't make a mess. We won't do anything. It's just 3 miles. You'll get $50. You'll be back here before they're done. And the guy really thinks about it for a minute. And he's like, okay, get in. So then we convince him to stop at the liquor store and get, we go in, we pay for a bottle of champagne. We're like, well, you don't have to be back till 7. Could we just drive around and have a drink in the limo? So he's like, not sure about it. So I'm like, girls, if we all throw in $5 more, like, this is a pretty like fun thing we're doing now. Like, we just commandeered a limo and here we are, like, driving around Nashville in a limo, and we're not limo people. So the guy says, I don't know, I should really get back. So we're like, well, we'll each give you, $5 more. So it'll be, another $25. So he's like thinking, and I'm like, really? Like, are these guys paying you $75 an hour for this limo? Or is your company getting that and you're getting like $20 of it? And he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you what I'm making. I'm like, well, I'd have to assume you're not making $75 an hour. I'm like, so there's $25 more if you just drive us around. You'll still be back by 7. You can drop us off, any place downtown on Broadway. So he agrees to it. And my friends are like, how did that just happen? Like, what are you doing? And then, so crazy. Funny things like that. I've done a lot of those things, which kind of make everybody laugh. But
oh, man, the power of negotiation. Yeah. It's in everything. A job interview, a sales situation, whether you're in a personal situation where you need to get something, it's a life skill.
It is, and it's funny. One of my mentors told me the best advice he ever could give me was that everything in life is a negotiation. And he said, salespeople intrinsically do it all day long, and when they get home, they don't want to do it. And it's funny because I realized I was that person. Like, I'm constantly negotiating. When I get home, I don't want to negotiate. If I go to buy a car, I just want to say to the person, here's the bottom line. Like, you got to win, I got to win. Let's do this. Like, I don't want to haggle back and forth. Yeah. I'm the person if I go to a yard sale, I'm not going to haggle with the person. Like, I just want to do it. And he said, to really improve your skill set and get comfortable, like, really good people always ask for something, negotiate like everything. So when you walk into the hotel, always asking, for the upgrade. When you're on the airplane, and so many people are timid to do it, even though customers do it to us all day long. They're asking for things, but we as salespeople don't ask for enough value adds. And he kind of modeled that behavior a lot. We'd go out to dinner, and he had worked actually for Platco for quite some time, and we're at Anthony's one night, and he says to the waitress, "Listen, we're going to order." We had some reps that flew in from Brazil, so it was a big deal, and we're taking him out to a nice dinner. And he said, we're going to order at least 3 bottles of this wine. It's $70 a bottle. He's like, so right there, your bar bill is going to be over $200. Can we get a free appetizer? And she's kind of like shocked by it, and she doesn't know what to say. So he's like, gets the manager over, and the manager, he's like, listen, I'm not trying to be a jerk. Like, we tip well. We're going to be a nice table. We've got 8 guests here, but I know we're going to have at least three bottles of this wine. Can we get a free appetizer? And he's like, no brainer. You're like, okay, the most expensive appetizer is $15. So yeah, we'll give you a free appetizer. Yeah. And we still ordered 4 other ones, but he's like, that's how it's done. And I started to realize it. And he's like, when people start to realize that there is something in it for him. So this manager is like, yeah, I now know I have a promise that this isn't a table. It's just ordering water. That, they're going to have a pretty hefty bill. They're going to do things. I'm going to do something nice. And in turn, they're going to be happy about their experience. It just makes things better. So now I try to test myself out with that a lot. So like, even if I don't negotiate on the car price itself, it's like, okay, but I want 3 free oil changes. And, people generally will give that to you if you can make it easy. And when you can suggest what you want, instead of saying, what can you do for me? Because some people have no idea. Like, they're reaching for things like, what am I going to do?
And their default is to be defensive. Like, oh, sorry, I can't. This is like, I don't have the choice, or this is.
It's hard thinking. But when you say, just even the little things, checking into the hotel, do you have free bottles of water? Could I get 2 more? Like, and they're like, oh yeah, you made it easy. You've given them the path of least resistance. You've given them a solution. It seems pretty low risk. Yeah, we'll do it. Like, you're a Hilton's Honor member. Of course we can do it, So that's been really fun. The last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, I've been really practicing that, which mortifies my husband most of the time because he's not a negotiator.
My wife would be mortified.
Yeah. And he gets embarrassed by it.
Different personalities.
Yeah.
It's funny because like I used to bond with Steve Frederick all the time.
Okay.
Before, you know Steve
Yep.
Frederick? Yeah, he used to work at Clinton Community for such a long time. Now he's recently over at Paul Smith's. But when I was the director of the Boy Scouts, we were both like talk fundraising. That was our version of sales, right? And you always used to comment on just the different personalities in the world, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. But we'd go to conferences and we'd both share the same experience where you'd walk into a room at a conference I'd do it for the Boy Scouts, he'd do it for higher ed, and all the sales role people were over standing up in a corner, like shooting the shit, talking to laughing out loud, being really loud. And then all the people who were not, that was not their comfort zone, were just kind of quietly sitting at a table. Everybody was happy.
Yes.
Yep. It's just a different.
Absolutely. It's a different dynamic. Right.
Yeah. So anyhow, I feel like you and I could talk for hours about all of these things, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, transition to the rapid fire section.
Okay.
You ready for this?
I'm ready for this.
This is it. This is it.
This is
the big.
I'm ready.
This is the big show now. Okay,
right.
The Stories of Gumption rapid fire. Okay, question number 1. What's a book you would gift to a friend and why?
So a book I would gift to a friend is called The Day the World Came to Town.
Oh, wow.
And it's a very interesting book. It's about Gander, Newfoundland. And for people who are about our age or older, I think it's amazing. So it's about when 9/11, the attacks were happening, there was all these flights that were in the air, these transatlantic flights. That is the furthest most point to Europe from the North America continent. So they started rerouting people. It was an old military base, so they had all this space. And this town of 7,000 people welcomed 10,000 people in one day at 9/11. So these are poor, uneducated, rural farmers. By default, people in Newfoundland they're known to be a little peculiar, but super friendly, and they welcome these people and they open up their homes. And many of these flights were actually returning to New York City. And so this is their hometown under attack. They're stuck in Canada. Middle of nowhere, Canada. It's like the equivalent of if you drove to Florida from New York, it's that far north.
Wow.
They get rerouted there, and these people are stuck there for 3, 4, 5 days, like sleeping in churches and synagogues and people's houses, and they shut down the school. And this is, a time before Wi-Fi, a time before, there was no long distance. So people are just letting them use their phones and doing it and getting these astronomical bills. The school that was there had like phone bills of like $13,000. And as people are trying to pay for it, they're like, no, this is like on behalf of our country. Thank you. And doing these things. And it just showed the reciprocity. As years went on, they've set up scholarship funds for these people. They've redone things in the schools. Like all these people were just so touched by this kindness.
Wow.
And it was just an interesting story. And actually, I traveled to Newfoundland this summer because I was so in love.
That's
and there's
awesome.
now a Broadway play that's about this whole story about the day the
Holy
world came
smokes.
to town.
What's the name of this book again?
The Day the World Came to Town. And it's a pretty short read. It's nothing high tech. But in my mind, it kind of shifted that perspective of like, you just think of this terrible, terrible thing that happened on 9/11 that, I remember exactly where I was. I remember being glued to the TV, and you just saw so much of the negative. And then you hear the story that like in Canada, there was just all this really cool things that were going on. And as they start to really profile some of these people that, one guy was a New York State trooper who had been in Ireland for something that's coming back. And then there was like a family that had just adopted 2 babies from, I think, like Russia that are on this plane. And now they have these babies that they just got and they don't even get to go home. And these families like band together to like try to get back to the United States. And, there was people who had children that were still living in New York City. So It was just this really amazing book. And it was pretty inspiring. And it was just nothing that was like, every now and then you read these books that are so inspiring, but you almost think it's like, that would never happen to me. It's like,
right.
It's great, like your guy that, was the exterminator and then became a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
But I know that's not going to happen to me.
No,
where,
me either. But,
but it's inspiring. But then you see something like this and it's so inspiring and it's like so real.
Yeah, I like it. The Day the World Came to Town.
Yep.
I dig it. Question number 2. What's a piece of advice that you would go back and give to your 18-year-old self if you could?
I probably have 3 pieces of advice. The first one would be drink more water. I think back when I was 18, I think like a glass of water a day was enough. And I don't think I ever drank more than that. Like I would carry around a Nalgene bottle for days without refilling it. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing is I would probably remind myself to save more money. Like it was a lot of fun when I was younger, but it was just that transactional fun that, like, if I'd gotten in the routine early on of saving a portion of my paycheck that I never saw, I don't think I ever would have missed it. So whether you invest it in property or you invest it in like a IRA or a 401k or something, a savings account, I think that if you can start that mentality of just always putting it aside, you never miss it. And then the other thing is, I would say, like, find yourself some really good friends, because I think it's made all the difference in my life. It's nice to have, I've got a really super supportive family who I love very much, but it's also nice to have a group of friends, and they're the people you make memories with, and you do a lot of fun things.
Yep. You gotta have all of that, really. And I definitely recognize the need to have saved probably when I was younger too, but I've had freaking phenomenal 20s.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you bounce back from it, but
it is what it is.
You know.
Question number 3. Name one of your top bucket list items.
So it's funny because it's actually coming to fruition, but it's to hike Machu Picchu.
No kidding.
So this summer, there's 5 other girls and I that are going to hike Machu Picchu. So we're going to go at the beginning of the summer.
Oh, that's so freaking cool. I'm jealous. Take lots of pictures.
Yeah, it's and that's another thing. The logistics of that are not easy. It's not like there's, especially getting here from New York, that there's no direct flights from where you have to go to the small country, so a small area of the country. So you fly into Lima, and then you take like a 1-hour commuter flight someplace else. But it's 20 something hours of transit time to get there.
Oh my God. Reminds me of my trip to Australia. I studied abroad in Australia for 6 months in college, but you have to go from here to L.A., then across the Pacific, and just from L.A. to Brisbane, Australia was like 15 hours.
Yeah. It's not as much time in the air, but there's just no easy way to get there.
There's no easy way. Yeah.
From here. I mean, if we lived in Chicago maybe, or from Miami, they have direct flights, but everything is like 3-hour flight here, 2-hour layover, and just,
keeping the cost reasonable.
There's not. It's actually more reasonable than I thought, to be honest.
Okay.
The flight is costing more than actually the trip with Sherpas and guides and everything.
Wow. I'll take lots of pictures.
I'll
be checking for that. That sounds awesome. If you could, I don't know. Question number, this is number 4. Okay. If you could meet one historical figure, who would it be and why?
She's not really historical, but I want to meet Ellen. I love Ellen. So she's kind of historical because she's been around for a while. But there's something that's so cool about her. And she just, to me, like, I like that even though she has very strong political views, she's more focused on kindness.
Yes.
She's more focused on, like, it's okay if you support somebody I don't support. We'll talk about other things.
Kindness is infectious.
Yeah.
And civil discourse. Geez, where'd that go?
I know. And I think that's there's just something about her that's so cool to me. And just that, I think she's somebody I kind of aspire to be more like, because she just is always looking for the fun side of things, the lighter side of things. And like what she's talking about is generally not anything that's super, technical or crazy. It's just like this down-to-earth basics, and I just see all the good that she does, and I like her attitude. Like I just really like, especially that she can disagree with people and it's okay. She doesn't hate them. Instead of being like, oh, we can't be friends, you can't be on my show, she'll just be like, we're not going to talk about this. Let's talk about something else. So
dance more in life. I love it.
Oh, and her dance moves are hysterical.
Question number 5: if you could put up a billboard anywhere in the world, what would you put on it?
So I don't know specifically what I'd put on it. I know part of the slogan I'd put on it, but I'd have to put something really funny. So because I just feel like, like when you're driving, and like I feel like when you're driving, you're in one of 2 mindsets, maybe 3. Either you're completely zoned out and not paying attention, which we don't want people to be that way, or you're really angry because you're like, oh, I'm stuck in traffic, or this is going to take me 5 hours to get to, where I'm going, or you're in a really good mood, like it's a gorgeous day, your windows are down, like so. I just feel like when you can interrupt somebody's day with something funny, it just changes the whole dynamic of everything. It makes people's day better, because I think especially now in the world we live in, where people are screenshotting memes and you see things like people like to laugh, and I don't think we laugh enough. So I would definitely want it to be something funny, probably a little more on the risque side, like not just the plain old why did the chicken cross the road type jokes, but something. And then I don't know. One thing that's like my friends and I have always like joked about is like, you hear like when you're a kid, secrets don't make friends.
Yeah.
And, you shouldn't tell secrets. So like kind of our mantra is secrets don't make friends, but they sure do keep them. And we just joke about that, like we have to remain friends forever because we've just got so many secrets, whether it's, getting a limo ride or, sneaking into a private suite at Amy Schumer's show in Albany or whatever it is. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Last question. You ready for it?
I'm ready for it.
All right. We got to put together a 3-person board of directors.
Yep.
To guide and mentor you through the rest of your life. So who would you choose to be on your 3-person board of directors? They can be alive, deceased, famous, or not. But who would you choose and why?
Okay, so the first person I would choose is one of my mentors. He's still alive. It's kind of a risky one because he's like 72 right now. So if it's the rest of my life, like, I don't know. Like, it's hard to say. But if he can still, pass on his knowledge from the afterlife,
sure.
That's fine. When I first met him, he gave me this awesome story of, and I had just happened to be born in 1979. So in his office, he had a framed check, and it was in the amount of $5,200 and something dollars. And it was from 1979. And that was his very first check. And he was a hell of a sales guy. And he has this crazy path, just a Texan, went in the Army, young guy, dad was a train conductor, so didn't come from any wealth. There's no oil money or anything. Grew up very middle class. And once he got out of the Army, he decided he was going to go to law school, became a lawyer. And the year that he became a lawyer, he said lawyers started at $18,000 a year, which I think probably in 79 wasn't bad. It wasn't great. But he said a buddy of his from law school and him decided that they knew somebody that had this company, and the sales for that company were about $80,000 a month. And the company was struggling. It was at that point, and it was before bankruptcy and whatnot, but they just weren't going to make it. But they knew they had this great product. So his buddy and him that were lawyers wrote the contract and said, okay, we get a percentage of sales, anything over 80,000, but we'll help you turn around your company, because they all knew how to sell. They knew there was some legal jargon that could be written into contracts that would help the bottom line, et cetera, et cetera. So they do it. And then once they get over this $100,000 threshold, it goes up exponentially larger. And then when it goes up over this, it gets exponentially larger. So he said, the first month they end up turning around just from easy low-hanging fruit, $100,000. These people are delighted. And when they signed this contract, they thought there's no way that we'll give them X percentage of sales because we'll never get there. And if we do, we'll be so happy because it's, 3 times what we're doing now. So sure enough, they quickly within a year do it. And that's where I first kind of fell in love. We kind of joke about this, and I don't mean to it's going to sound negative when I say it, but the hashtag Me Too. I hate that hashtag for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into. But in my mind, I've changed it hashtag Me Too. I have every chance to do this because people can do these things. And he started, he was bringing home checks of over $5,000 a week in 1979.
Wow.
Just a boy from Texas with a law degree who said, I'm never going to be a lawyer again. I'm going to do sales, and started buying up real estate in LA, doing all sorts of things. And when I started seeing these stories, that was somebody who was like, wow. And the more time I've spent with him, and we're very, very good friends. We've worked together on a variety of projects, that he's the person who's got that really big picture thinking. So it's really neat that he can kind of guide me through things, and he's really good with the financial side and how to get the best deal. So he would definitely be one person on my team. And I think the other 2 people, it's going to sound like a cop-out, would be my 2 kids. Because it would give me a chance to spend more time with them. And I also think they don't overthink things. I think as adults, we overthink everything. And my 2 daughters couldn't be more different. My youngest, her name is Myra Spicy. Her middle name is actually Spicy. And she's super, super spicy. She's very spunky, and she's just this wild child at heart. She's very kind. She's a good kid. But then my older daughter is just this really sweet, gentle, kind-hearted girl. And I think they'd be the perfect mix. So I can have somebody who can help me with a plan. These 2 kids I could spend a lot of time with. And then they can be my doers because they're going to be much younger than me. So I think they could kind of, without overthinking things, think about the things that would make them happy, me happy, our whole family happy. And, sometimes it's hard to get that balance of how much work, how much, family, how much that. So it'd be neat to kind of mix them.
Fantastic. Well, this has been awesome.
Thanks for having me on. I had a really fun time.
Yeah, we'll have to continue the conversation, and I'm going to definitely check the Facebook for these Machu Picchu. When are you going again?
Looks like the end of June.
End of June, yeah. That's coming up.
It is.
Holy smokes.
Don't worry, my training plan's already in existence.
Carb load.
I'll train just as hard for that as I did for the race.
Yes. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening in for another episode of the Stories of Gumption podcast. Again, I'm Ryan, your host, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ryan.